I wonder if the nymphs were like, LOL, yo, what the heck? Like, we just met you. Like, what on earth?
Welcome to the Winx Forever Podcast. Join creator, host, and lifelong Winx fan, Lola Valentine, as she invites you to take a deep dive into the very cool universe of Winx Club. So, whether you've been a Winx Club fan since 2004, or you vaguely remember the show from your childhood, or even if you're being introduced to it for the first time, welcome. This is the Winx Forever Podcast.
Hello, fairy friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Winx Forever Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Lola Valentine. As we continue our deep dive into Season 1 of the original Winx Club series, this week we are rewatching Season 1, Episode 11, and of course comparing the original Ray English, Cinelume English dub to the first American English dub created by 4Kids TV. Being an American Winx fan, growing up in America with Winx Club, it was so cool to discover that Winx Club had so many different dubs. And I've loved getting to compare these two dubs to see how different and even how similar both of them are. Let's just dive right into Winx Club Season 1, Episode 11. So the title of the episode is The Monster and the Willow in the Cinelume dub, but in the 4Kids dub it is titled The Junior League. And if you don't know what a Junior League is, in the 4Kids version of this episode, Flora refers to the undies, the nymphs and the water nymphs in Black Mud Swamp as the Black Mud Swamp Junior League. And basically what a Junior League is, it's referring to this Association of Junior League International Incorporated. It's a private nonprofit educational women's volunteer organization aimed at improving communities and the social, cultural, and political fabric of civil society, quote unquote, from their Wikipedia page. The Junior League chapters can be found in the United States and Canada and Mexico and even in the United Kingdom. And it's one of the oldest and largest organizations of its kind. So yeah, it's really interesting. Members engage in developing civic leadership skills, fundraising, volunteering. But in the 4Kids dub, to bring it back to Winx Club, Flora is talking about how the BMJL, the Black Mud Junior League, how they have the cheerful gladiolus, and that's what she is going to talk to them about in the Black Mud Swamp. So there's a little backstory on why the 4Kids title is called the Junior League and kind of what even that is, because I don't even know if I knew what a Junior League was when I was little. I think I had to ask my mom about it when I watched this episode, like what is that, so yeah, really interesting. I love the fact that they bring in some of these cultural structures or structural cultural concepts into the world of Winx Club, kind of giving their world a little more structure and seeing how these different beings, these different characters all, work together in the same kind of ecosystem of their society. So yeah, anyway, the synopsis for this episode reads, for her exam, Flora must find a rare flower that inhabits the Black Mud Swamp. They meet the undies, little water nymphs, victims of a spell cast by a red willow. The fairies successfully get hold of the flowers and manage to defeat the red willow. Okay. It's just a nice little, overview. So the episode opens up with Stella and Flora arguing about the plants that Flora has placed in Stella's room. So Stella's complaining about Flora's plants in her room that have been invading her precious items, which are makeup and clothes, essentially. But Flora mentions that even, if Stella has a problem with it, like, she also placed plants in Tecna's room, and Tecna doesn't seem to have a problem with it. Basically, like, not gaslighting Stella, but basically being like, well, you're the only one that has a problem with my plants being in your room. Like, I think that Flora is in the wrong here. I really, really do. Like, Flora, girl, you are being a bad roommate. Like, you have to respect other people's spaces. You have to respect other people's, like if Stella's like, yeah, sure, you can put a flower in my room, but you didn't tell her that these flowers were going to adapt to their environment and use up all of her makeup and shrink her clothes. Like, I just feel like that's maybe something you should tell your roommate before you put this type of plant in her room. But Bloom, Stella, and Flora go into Musa and Tecna's room when, Flora asks if she's seen Tecna, and Musa didn't even know that, like, Flora had placed plants in her room. So I think that the fact that Flora was telling Stella, like, well, you're the only one that has a problem with it, Tecna is fine with it. And it's like, but, like, also you didn't ask Musa, and that's also Musa's room. So it's so funny. But in the 4Kids dub, and the compared to the original, Musa is actually suggesting to Flora in this scene, like, what plant she might be able to use to help unshrink Stella's couture clothes, which is really cool because we know from context from other episodes that Musa is a really good student. Like, she has some of the highest grades out of all the other Winx. And I think that I remember reading somewhere, either on an official website article or somewhere, that potionology is like one of Musa's favorite subjects. So when Flora, comes in to her room and she asks Musa, hey, have you seen Tecna? Musa's like, no, she's been under the radar, like, not seen her. Flora's like, I need to come up with a potion to help unshrink couture. And Musa's like, well, doesn't the nocturnal ivy do something like that? And she's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I can, mix it with this unguent, whatever. And that's when she finds Tecna in the closet. And of course, that scene. But also in this scene, Musa in the original is reading a book, like a really big, like comically big book for some reason. But in the 4Kids dub, the book was omitted and changed to a bunch of sheet music that Musa was reading on her bed, which is really cool. I like that, the 4Kids dub kind of had that, I don't know, that insight into the character of like, well, maybe she would be reading something music related, and I love that. I love that attention to detail. It may be a weird thing to some people that they, omitted a book and then replaced it. But I think that it's a really cool way to see that the 4Kids dub took such attention to detail and considered these little details that I love. So when Flora checks Tecna's closet, since she asked for her, to be able to put these seeds into Tecna's closet, she needed a dark place for them. She found Tecna completely tangled up in these vines. Flora releases her, and Tecna tells her that all she wanted was a pair of trousers, and then this plant grabbed her. It's super funny. I love the 4Kids Tecna because I've said this in the past. The 4Kids Tecna is so much sassier and has so much more personality. She's a little bit more of a know-it-all, I feel like more outspoken about how like brilliant she is, which is really funny to me. Like, it is her personality in the 4Kids dub, and I love it so much. But in the 4Kids dub, she was like, all I wanted was a jacket and I got kidnapped by this psycho plant. Like, it's so good. Like, I love it. But she also shares in the 4Kids dub that Flora's plant ate her notebook. And it's really funny because then Tecna's like, what am I going to tell the teacher, that a plant ate my homework? Like, yeah, she'll believe that. Like, it's just so sassy and such a good, like, dialogue moment for the 4Kids dub that I love. But also, like, I feel like this, I mean, Tecna in the original version already had a good excuse to be mad at Flora because Tecna wanted to know what kind of seeds they were, and Flora tells her that they were triple S's, which apparently is a bad plant. I don't know, and like they grew up really fast, faster than Flora kind of thought. But I think that, with her plant not only kidnapping her and like tying her up in her own closet, but also eating her freaking homework, like I feel like Tecna has, completely like reasonable, explanation of why she's so mad at Flora. Like, yes, like, girl, you are valid. Like, you are justified in your anger here because that is pretty messed up. And yeah. So in the original, though, the girls all complained, aside from, I guess, Bloom and really Musa, that they didn't like the fact that Flora had spread her plants all around their dorm and had become hectic to their lifestyle, which, like, fair. Like, Flora, like I said, I mean, be a better roommate, like, be more considerate. But after being confronted about her plants, Flora decides to kind of, it's just, the scene. The scene has very much, not pick-me vibes, but, like, I don't like attention-seeking vibes, I guess, from Flora. Because she's like, I'm sorry, I'll move out to Blackmud Swamp, and I won't bother you anymore. And I'm just like, this to me, like, gives me, like, Bloom running away from Althea vibes. Like, she's waiting for her friends to be like, oh, no, don't go, we're sorry, like, kind of dramatic. But, that is kind of what Bloom does. She does try to convince her that it, was dangerous to go by herself and that, she should stay in the dorm. But to no avail, Flora leaves, and Bloom, then scolds her friends for saying, what they did to Flora. But, like, I don't know how Bloom, like, I mean, like, yes, Stella and Tecna were kind of rude to Flora, but like I said, Flora was being a bad roommate. Like, maybe it was because Bloom is roommates with Flora, so, like, she has probably, like, a different connection with Flora than the other girls do. So Bloom was probably doing it in solidarity for her roomie. Like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, I guess. But, Bloom then being like, well, I told her I was going to help her study, and where I come from, we keep our promises. And then she slams the door and, like, storms out and leaves and follows Flora to the swamp. Which, like, good for her, Bloom. Okay, cool. Like, but in the 4Kids dub, I absolutely loved the scene because Bloom just absolutely blows up at the other girls for making Flora move out to Blackmud Swamp. It just reminds me that, like, Bloom isn't this, like, goody-goody like she's portrayed in the original version. Because in the 4Kids version, Bloom is this feisty leader who wants to do right and do the right thing for her friends. And I love it. Because in the 4Kids dub, Bloom is literally like, so she made a couple of mistakes. Like, that doesn't mean that she needs to go live in a swamp. Like, it's so good. It's really good. And I love I love the 4Kids dialogue. So. So the next scene, we see Flora setting up camp in Blackmud Swamp, but she's actually talking to the Winx because they decided after Bloom storming out and guilting them to follow Flora and help her find this plant that she needs in Blackmud Swamp. But of course, not everyone was happy about it. Stella was still a bit grumpy and asked how long that their little camping trip will last. And Flora replied that as long as they can find the cheerful gladiolus, which is this rare flower that she needs, that it should not last long. And with that, Stella wanted to start the search, but Flora explains that this flower is skittish and has to be coaxed into coming out. And then Flora takes out her potion bottle and she reveals to them that she'd been working on this potion that can duplicate anything that it drips onto, meaning that they don't even need the entire flower. They just need like a petal of it or like a, leaf of it. And so they begin, kind of to look for this flower, but Bloom's like, well, but we'll leave Kiko here. He'll be safer, the swamp is dangerous for little bunnies. And Stella, of course, being Stella, she's like, well, maybe I should stay here too. And it's really funny in the 4Kids version. Musa is like, get your booty moving now. And I hadn't really noticed this until one of you had pointed it out on a post of mine on, I think, Instagram, where you mentioned that that the 4Kids dub seems to be very quote unquote booty obsessed. Like the word booty is referenced a lot in the 4Kids dub in the first several seasons because I feel like in the early 2000s, the word booty, like to reference someone's backside, was very popular for some reason. Like, we have like, oh, let's kick her booty. Icy's gonna kick Fairy booty. What else? Like, get your booty moving now. Like, it's all so, it's so funny. That was just kind of a slang term that was used in the early 2000s that is heavily used in the 4Kids dub, which is hilarious. And it's so funny that was pointed out in one of my posts because I hadn't really like paid attention to it a ton until that was pointed out. So shout out to that. But I also loved the dialogue in this scene in the 4Kids version because, Stella, it's not that she kind of makes up an excuse, I feel like, but it could be her intuition that she alludes to her fear of something being out there in the swamp, and like, ooh, very ominous, very, scary. And we get this foreshadow of the red willow. And so it was very nice storytelling, I believe, on the writer's part of the 4Kids team, adding that in there. So as the girls walk through the swamp, Stella ends up tripping up and getting all dirty, and she wants to complain, but Flora covers her mouth about that time, and they notice the undies, the little water nymphs that inhabit the swamp, and they're in the water, and Flora doesn't want to disturb them. However, Stella bites Flora's hand that was covering Stella's mouth, and Flora screams, which alerts the water nymphs of their presence, and they flee, but Flora convinces them that they're not their enemies, that they're here because they need their help. And the scene was very different in the 4Kids dub, as they cut out most of the backstory about the little water nymphs, about their little air pods that they live in. They did mention it very briefly in the 4Kids dub because Bloom's like, oh, what are those little bubbles? And Flora's like, well, it's really cool. Each bubble houses one nymph, and but it wasn't as big of a deal. Like, it wasn't like, all of this backstory about the undies, which I really did enjoy in the original, watching it compared to the 4Kids. So yeah, that was a good scene. Oh, and obviously 4Kids also took out the part where Stella bit Flora's hand because we can't have little kids biting each other. Don't bite your friends. So, but the water nymphs take the Winx to their home. But because they were so small, they could not invite them in, obviously. And I thought that was such a cute line. But they did inform them that their queen wanted to see them. And so they chat for a little bit. And the water nymphs actually reveal to the Winx that they are under distress because of this monster of Black Island that, kind of threatens their existence daily, which is really scary because Bloom asks, why haven't they moved to another location? And they explain to the Winx that their survival, like the nymph's survival, depends on a plant called the zilith, and that is only found on Black Island, where the big monster inhabits a cave, quote unquote, underneath the island. Apparently, according to the nymphs, though, this plant produces a strong, transparent material, which is also what they use to make their homes out of. and that one of them recently, one of the Undyes, had volunteered to go harvest some but hadn't returned yet. So the Winx decide to help them by going to the island and to find her and fight off the monster. I liked the backstory of the Zillith and the Rye English, that it was like, their home. In the 4Kids version, the Zillith is actually what the Undyes eat. So it was a little more dramatic, of like, no, this is literally like what they eat, and this is the only thing in their diet. Like, if they do not get these Zillith leaves, they will not. It's not that they'll be homeless. They will literally die of starvation. Like, that is heavy. That's very heavy. One of the things that I did hate in both versions, though, of this episode is where Bloom was like, yeah, we'll help you. And then they all just transform, like, out of nowhere. Like, it was just so, like, abrupt. I wonder if the nymphs were like, LOL, yo, what the heck? Like, we just met you. Like, what on earth? But yeah, the transformation was, like, super, super abrupt. And kind of, like, I don't know. It didn't flow right in either of the episodes, like in either of the versions. So really weird. But the Winx transform and they fly above the pond that the creature was said to live in. And Stella thought she heard something, but Tecna says, like, no, you didn't hear anything. And then this is when Stella, starts to explain to the Winx that, like, she decided to average out the size of this creature, comparing their size to the water nymph size, and, like, saying that it could probably just be a medium-sized creature, because, like, the nymphs are tiny compared to them, and so they thought that the Winx were big, and so maybe this creature isn't as big as they made it out to be. Maybe it's just, like, big to the nymphs. Rewatching both of these English versions, it really surprised me how much of the dialogue was the same, or basically the same. The part with Stella averaging out the size of the creature, the nymphs were afraid of compared to them. And honestly, I love that Stella came up with that. I love that. I mean, that's very smart thinking on Stella's part. But of course, she was wrong, because then the creature pops out of the water, startling the girls, and then it takes Musa in its mouth and retreats into the water. Excuse me? I remember in the 4Kids promos of this episode, when it aired, it was the most dramatic. Like, it was, and I loved it. It was because the monster takes Musa underwater and Bloom screams, oh, it ate her! And all the girls yell, Musa! It's just like, it was so classic. It was so dramatic. I loved it. So the Winx needed to rescue Musa, and they did so by using this little air bubble method that they had learned from the water nymphs, and they dived down into the water to retrieve Musa. They found the creature and Musa when the creature opened its mouth, and Bloom kind of dives in before it closed on her, and she used this magic spell to transport them out of the creature's mouth and to the surface with Musa, and they appear on the island. I also just enjoyed this whole sequence, this whole underwater sequence, a lot better in the 4Kids dub. Like, Tecna explaining that Bloom was using a spell to transport herself and Musa out of the monster's mouth, like the music, the drama, like, it all just seemed more action-packed than the Rye dub, because the Rye dub was, like, more calm, and honestly, like, it was kind of boring to watch to me, honestly. Like, I don't know if that was just because I was used to, the 4Kids dub, but having, saved Musa, and now they're on the island walking around, the girls slowly start to kind of, like, get sleepy and doze off. And everyone except for Tecna. And Flora points out that, there was a lovely smell in the air. And then Tecna decides to analyze the air content, only to find that it was mixed with sleeping gas. Which, what? So she urges the girls to stay awake, but it was impossible. Bloom was the last to fall asleep, and she called out for Tecna. And Tecna, like, catches Bloom before she could fall, and Bloom points to the quote-unquote leader tree, which is the red willow. Before Flora fell asleep, though, she was talking about how, these red willows all grow in a spiral motion that leads, around their leader tree, which I thought that was a really cool, that was omitted from the 4Kids dub. And so I loved, getting kind of that explanation of why they grow that way. Was, kind of cool. But Tecna makes a little oxygen bubble with a hole in it to let the bad air, the sleeping gas, escape. And Bloom wakes up, and the two of them, make the air bubble larger using their magic. And the bubble extends further enough to wake up the birds and the other Winx members. And so all together, they all make the air bubble large enough to circle around the little water nymph that was at the base of the red willow tree. This moment for Tecna in both dubs is so iconic. I love that even though she struggled in the previous Black Mud Swamp episode to connect with the voice of nature, that here you can see that through her time with the Winx between episode 4 and episode 11, that Tecna has been able to better connect with her more natural instincts, I guess, instead of her logical thinking side, because she was one of the first ones to notice that, the birds on the island weren't chirping, and that, she was the first one to realize that, the sleeping gas in the air from the trees, it's just a really cool moment to see how much, Tecna had grown from episode 4 to now. So when the little water nymph wakes up, she tells them that the monster is actually a turtle who had been sleepwalking for eons due to the red willow. And the red willow then attacks the air bubble, trying to break it, that the Winx created. And so Bloom tries to attack its branches, which, it doesn't do anything. But then she noticed that, she notices oh, no, I don't need to attack its branches. I need to attack its roots. So she casts, her fire blast at the roots. And so it then begins to burn and harden the willow. And Flora, with her flower power, finishes it off by completely dispelling it and removing the red willow and purifying the air. Which, can we talk about this red willow for a second? I absolutely love these magical creatures and things that are introduced in the first, couple of seasons of Winx Club. The red willow reminds me of the Whomping Willow from the Harry Potter series. And I love it because you can tell, if you've read any of the Harry Potter series, just the different magic elements that they allude to from that franchise in the Winx Club. And it's so cool because it shows that the writers and creators of the Winx Club at this time were heavily influenced by some of the popular fantasy shows and books that were coming out as Winx Club was being created. Another great example of the Winx creators being inspired by popular fantasy works was when the little water nymph was telling the Winx about the monster, illustrations from a book, kind of appear and can be seen. But the letters, this is so cool, but the letters written on the book in that page are written in Tingwar script. So Tingwar is one of the many fictional scripts created by English writer J.R.R. Tolkien for his fictional universe, featuring it in his popular series like the Lord of the Rings books. Another place that you can see Tingwar script in the Winx Club franchise is in the Book of Fate in the Secret of the Lost Kingdom movie. So it's really, really cool for me because I love fantasy shows. I grew up watching Lord of the Rings and reading the books. And, I love seeing all of these different elements, kind of helping mold Winx Club and bringing those elements into the show even. It's just so freaking cool. So after completing the mission, the girls return to the queen water nymph with the little water nymph that they found on the island. And the queen then explains that the turtle will be leaving and has allowed them to collect as many plants as they can before it left. However, it will not be able, to be enough to sustain them since the plant cannot grow within their soil. Flora then obviously, pulls out her little rapid growth formula, and she can multiply, however many Zulith leaves they need. So the girls praise Flora for her work, and that is when Bloom asks if it was okay for her to now use, their rooms as experiments. And Tecna and Stella was sort of going to agree, Flora, yeah, you're pretty cool. What you do is pretty all right, Like, yeah, sure, you can still use our rooms, I guess. But Flora reassures them that won't be necessary and that she'll, make do with the space that she has in, her and Bloom's room. But the Undyes, the little water nymphs, they're so thankful for the Winx, what they had done, that they reward Flora with a whole cheerful gladiolus flower. So now Flora knows that she will be able to absolutely pass her exam, and that she reminds Stella that, it was her turn to take the test in the magical reality chamber the next day. And it seemed that, Stella had forgotten. And so Stella kind of like panics, but the episode ends with all of the Winx kind of laughing at Stella's typical reaction. But in the 4Kids version, Flora actually says that she wants to keep her cheerful gladiolus in Stella's room. And since, Stella's room has the best sunlight, and the Winx all laugh at Stella's reaction to that instead. And instead of, Bloom asking if it was okay for Flora to continue doing her experiments in their rooms, Bloom actually, nudged them and was like, hey, don't you have anything, you want to say to Flora? And they actually are like, we're sorry, what you do is really cool. But it was a nice moment for the 4Kids version, for sure. So yeah, that's the whole episode. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll discuss the major events of this episode and share some fun facts comparing the Right English to 4Kids dub. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Winx Forever Podcast. Enjoying Winx Forever Podcast? Be sure to follow the show on your favorite streaming platform so that you're notified when new episodes are released. And we are back discussing season 1, episode 11. Kind of a filler episode, kind of a slice of life episode. It doesn't really follow any of the main plot of the series. And so typically we call that like a slice of life, getting to see kind of a little into their day-to-day life in the series of the Winx Club. It's funny because like this episode is a slice of life episode. The next episode, episode 12, is a slice of life episode. Like, filler episodes doesn't really follow the main plot at all. But I love them. Growing up, I remember watching these and rewatching them like so much. They were so special to me, and I absolutely enjoyed, I love the Black Mud Swamp episodes. I know that they can be kind of monotonous or maybe, it's a filler episode. It doesn't follow the main plot. So a lot of people, don't like those episodes because of that. But to me, I love it. I love the interactions between the Winx and the different magical creatures that are introduced in the swamp. It's so cool. So major events, obviously the Winx discovered the Undyes. The Undyes don't appear really again in the series. I mean, they appear later in season 1 to help fight, the witches, but besides that, they don't come back, like we just kind of, they disappear forever, which is a little sad. But also Flora receives the cheerful gladiolas, which also I don't believe appears ever again. And then the Winx, mainly Bloom and Flora, destroy the red willow. Major events. Major events to this episode because they don't really pertain to anything else in the series. It's fine. But some fun facts. Some people believe that the naming of this episode, the Willow and the monster, could possibly be a pun based on the name of the fairy tale, Beauty and the Beast. But neither the Tricks or Specialist or Faculty appear in this episode, so it makes it the first episode in the series that does not pertain to the main storyline of season 1, which is crazy because everyone thinks that episode 4 is a filler episode, but really it's not, because it does give us more context to the girls' relationships with the Specialist. It gives us more context to, what happens with the hunting troll, with the Tricks. And so, this technically is the true, first filler episode of season 1. Oh, in the Cinnalune version, I also forgot to say, Stella accidentally shooting what she thought was the monster in the water, and then a fish bubbled up and was dead. That was also cut from the 4Kids scene. So that was funny though. That was a funny moment. But at the end of all of our rewatch episodes, we are deciding what is the quintessential Winx-tastic moment of the episode. We are calling these our Winx Forever moments. And honestly, I really think that the Winx Forever moment for me in this episode has got to go to when the girls are on Black Island and Black Mud Swamp. The way that Tecna had to kind of assume this important leadership role in that moment to wake up her friends in order to destroy the Red Willow. It was so good. And the convergence that they used to make the air bubble bigger, them having to destroy the Red Willow, Bloom and Flora, it was just such a good, moment. It was a great Winx Forever moment. However, a good runner-up, I feel for a Winx Forever moment, was at the first of the episode when the girls are struggling to figure out how to live together in harmony in this dorm. I love this conflict at the beginning to open this episode because it shows our favorite fairies not always getting along, just like real roommates do. And I love that. And I think that it's important to show that, it's not always, just daisies, friendships are hard, relationships are hard, and learning to compromise and to work together is really important. So yeah, I love that. Wow, another episode down. We're getting close to the middle of season 1, which is wild. But tune in next week because we are discussing season 1, episode 12, Miss Magic's, the infamous banned episode from season 1. And we're discussing that episode with my friend and fellow American Winxer and cosplayer, Closet Chloe Cosplay. So super excited to have that conversation with Chloe. So I hope that you tune in next time. Until then, I am Lola Valentine, and this is the Winx Forever Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Winx Forever Podcast, be sure to follow or subscribe on your preferred streaming platform to be notified when new episodes drop. You can join in on the conversation when you follow at Winx Forever Podcast on social media. The theme for the Winx Forever Podcast is the song She Makes Magic by Big Wild.